why are we here? And I don't mean that as sort of a rhetorical question, type of question, like this morning at 3 a.m. when I was standing completely jet-lagged next to my bed, saying, why am I here? But why are we here as marketers? Because if we look at the flow of the day, indeed, it started off with something I think that's very close to our heart as marketers, purpose, brand purpose, organizational purpose, and then quickly moved into topics that you would typically expect at a media conference, around data, around media agencies competing for who knows most, and then finally into digital and measurements around digital. And then there's this session around global marketing. Why? Well, from our perspective, kudos to the organization, C Squared, and I think they're sort of showing their direction with the sister magazine of marketing and media, because the two are very quickly coming together. And indeed, as you said in your opening, we find that where, as the world globalizes, in the early days, things around media were, well, we're going to globalize strategy, but media, you can keep that local. Now, especially in digital, what you're seeing is that global teams are coming back and saying to local teams, actually, perhaps not. We'll do that at a global level as well. And it's particularly pertinent because if you really think about it from a sort of marketer's perspective and brand perspective, today, there isn't a marketer that isn't either working or competing against a global brand. Now, that may feel like something that's always been around, because we all know that Coke has been a global brand forever. But actually, just 10 years ago, things were very different. I know this because we have a challenger board, sort of 3 people that keep us sane. It's the former CMO of P&G, Jim Stengel, former CMO of Diageo, Rob Malcolm, and the former CMO of Unilever, Simon Clift. And exactly 10 years ago, it's now almost 11, I should say, Procter & Gamble had its very first global brand franchise meeting. And exactly 11 years ago, Unilever appointed its very first, and at the time only, global brand person. So that although global brands have been around for a long time, actually leading brands globally, having them organized centrally, is something quite new. And a lot of people are still trying to find out how to do that best. And quite frankly, over the last decade, we've seen a lot of companies try to get there, but there isn't an awful lot of learning on how to do that well. And that's why one of the things that we'll be pulling from a little bit here and sharing some of the results is the Leading Global Brand Study, where we focus just on that. What does it take to win in global marketing? And that's become a database with over 30,000 global marketing contributors over the last decade. And just some of the key findings, which I guess drive why we're here, is that one, we are seeing that global brands are becoming massively important, particularly as you look forward to the growth of organizations. And when you say, okay, global brands are important, but how are they led? Because in the old days, you know, Nestle were so close to the Vevey headquarters, but if you were in Australia and you were a marketing director and you wanted to make Kit Kat a discount brand, perhaps you couldn't do that, but you could do almost everything else. Until really in the last decade, the centralization of control has set in. So the question is, how's that going? Well, interestingly enough, very few organizations themselves, so this is self-claimed, feel that they are effectively leveraging their skill on a global level. So they're doing many of the same things in many different places around the world, but they're saying, we're not leveraging our skill, so then why are you doing it? What's the advantage of being global? And I guess the acid test would be, when you get something right, how good are you at quickly rolling that out? And as you see here, it's actually 14% of global marketeers that play back to us that they believe that when they have a success, they can leverage that quickly. Now, some of the challenges when we talk to these CMOs and global brand heads and category heads, as you will in a moment, that they face is one, that the transparency outside the company is actually far greater than it is inside the company. This picture is here because one of our clients, Starbucks, was surprised in the US and in the UK, which happen to be quite important markets, with the story that Starbucks now was opening a shop in the Forbidden City. Now, the stories in the UK press were front page and were all about how this American, company was disrespecting Chinese heritage. But actually, the Chinese were very, very proud because, as you probably know about China, you don't decide to open a shop there. The internal communication was far slower than the external communication. And the fights that happen when you have multiple teams working on the same brand at a local, perhaps regional and global level are immense, because suddenly you're talking about people's personal roles and things get very tricky very quickly. And in fact, people, when there's more than one brand team working on the same brand, it very quickly becomes not about how are we going to beat Procter, but is my idea better than the regional team's idea or the global team's idea? And I know that many of you are in global media businesses which experience exactly the same dynamic. And in fact, many of our things are about agencies bringing us in. And finally, about disconnected pockets of excellence, when there's great ideas, but they just don't make it across because people aren't talking to each other. And what we found, if you like, the conclusion of the Leading Global Brand Study in 3 minutes for you here, is that yes, there's a what around what do brands need to stand for. And that was what this morning was about purpose, around brands that serve universal needs. I'm not going to go there. But a real signifier in the success of global brands is how they're led, is how the global brand leaders themselves connect, inspire, focus, and organize the business, and then give each of the marketeers, no matter where they sit, the tools and the information to succeed. And that's the how, if you like. And the how has become so important, it came across several times this morning, because the roles are shifting. Not only are companies bringing things back in because they can't afford to have content generated by outside agencies, but now partners like Facebook, and in fact consumers, brand advocates, are beginning to play a very significant role. So who does what? And that's really what we want to talk about. How do the leaders of these categories orchestrate that mix? How do they get everybody to speak in concert and at the same time not lose that local relevance? So for that, there are two people here that I'm very honored that have made the journey to Montreux. Petra Zinkweg is really one of the marketeers that I see in front of my eyes when I think about the typical journey to global marketing. Starting in Unilever, over 20 years experience now, at a brand and then a category and then a different from foods to drinks to laundry and actually ending up in one of the top 3 dairy companies in the world, turning that quickly into a branded business. And then Christoph Michaelski, who has done a very similar journey and now at SCA, which is one of the top 3 hygiene companies in the world. Both challengers, both brand challengers, but also business challengers. And we're going to be talking about how they lead their categories and how they lead marketeers. But first, I'd like to invite each of them to talk a little bit about their business. Petra.
Well, thanks very much, Marc. Yeah, so I'm now 2 years in the role of category director for branded cheese at Friesland Campina. And Friesland Campina is world famous in the Netherlands, but maybe not so well known outside. So let me first talk a bit about Friesland Campina, 1 slide only, and then a very small case study on what we have been doing and what's out there next. So first of all, Friesland Campina is a dairy cooperative. And that is different from many other food companies, which means that we are owned by 14,000 farmers who send in the milk every day, and they pay us to valorize that milk and to really create added value products with it. So that is quite a different business system, but really, really interesting. We have offices in 25 countries around the world, but of course we sell our products and export our products to around 100 countries. And the branded business plays mainly in 3 categories. In dairy-based beverages, where you might know brands like Nunu or Campina or Dutch Lady or Peak. Baby food, mainly in Asia, which is the Friso brand. And then cheese, for which I'm responsible. There are 2 big brands around the world. One is the Frico brand, which you might have eaten, although you might have not been aware. And the Milner brand, which is a health and wellness brand mainly in Europe. So when I arrived, the target I was given was you need to double the business by 2020. And for that, I said, okay, fine, but then let's first create a strategy to really define how we're going to achieve that. Because it doesn't look that simple. Because at face value, you look at the cheese market, and these are pictures from Europe, where on the left-hand side, you see Italy, in the middle is Russia, and on the right-hand side is Holland. And at face value, this market looks really very different. But we started our strategy with real data digging. And so data from all elements of the market, consumers, trade, internal, external. And we discovered a lot of similarities, because that is the start of really be able to unleash that growth. So a lot of similarities in consumer behavior, how they use cheese, where they buy cheese, how they shop, and what they do with it. But most important, what you see the number, 70% of the people do not perceive any brand differentiation whatsoever. Although the needs which they express, which they have also in cheese, which is like many other food categories, it's all about health, it's about the sensory experience, and it's about convenience. So yes, a lot of similarities, yes, a lot of similar opportunities. So that allows a strategy which goes beyond a single country and opens up opportunities for global brands. And one of the things we discovered is that there are a lot of stories about cheese which are untold and which are really interesting for people, for our consumers in every single country we operate. On the one hand, there are the facts about the ingredients of cheese. On the other hand, is the storytelling about the production, the heritage, the recipes, the taste, the sensorial experience. Now, there's a whole world out there. And one of the things we choose to do is, on the one hand, we'll start to talk about our cows. I mean, it's so nice to have your own cows, produce the milk, talk about the farmers, know them, and be able to talk about it to your consumers, have the webcams there, and really start a conversation about that. About the richness of the milk and what that contributes and the quality of the milk, which is very important, for example, in Russia. It's not adulterated, it's really top quality milk. And at the other hand, you can talk, and a real opportunity to talk about the sensory experiences of the cheeses, and to the mothers and to the parents in Europe about the quality of the milk and the nutritional value. Like, for example, that 10 liters of milk going 1 kilogram of cheese, so you have a real condensed nutritional value, and which is similar, the calcium, for example, is similar as 2 glasses of milk. So that makes life much easier if you want to feed your children. In order to do that, we needed a different organization, and that's what we've created, and which is a different way of working. On the one hand, where we came from, because they were all local companies doing their own thing in perfect isolation, and we're now moving towards an organization which delivers global solutions. So we have a central team and which are locally activated. And that requires a different way of working. It's data-driven strategic planning rather than just ideas from local people. It's data-driven, and that it gives a framework to freedom to be creative. It's a scalable model because one of the growth pillars is new geographical areas and merger and acquisition. So when we would buy a new company, a different company, it's something which is scalable. And a big change in attitude from product-driven to brand-driven, because that's the way how you create added value. And also the central teams will have to provide the big innovations rather than the small incremental innovations, which you only are able to do when you are on a local basis, because you simply do not have the scale to be big and bold. And the whole way of working together is about interdependency. And this is my last slide. What it requires for marketeers to be on either a global side or on the local side is clear responsibilities, who does what, and be really strict about it at the beginning. And that means you need to empower some teams and you need to disempower other teams. But then it's all about creating the trust and the relationship, because you simply need each other to be successful in the marketplace. Christoph, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. In order to introduce you to SCA, I will talk about your most intimate body parts, because that's what we do. We're a company who basically does toilet paper, feminine hygiene, baby diapers, and for the few unlucky of you, incontinence care. And why is that important? Because you all think this is very intimate and very myself and very individual. But actually, we try to globalize that. So as a company, we're the world leader in incontinence care worldwide. We also have very strong regional positions. And basically, all we do is coming out of an initial acquisition in Sweden and then moving out, becoming global over time. And basically, you end up with a huge leading position across the world, but with a incredibly big number of local brands. We have only 2 global brands, and everything which was talked about in the meeting this morning basically is catering for that idea, that either you have one brand in one market and that's it, or because of the transparency, you have to be incredibly consistent wherever you are. But how do you want to be consistent with 19 toilet paper brands? That's rather difficult, okay? And on top of that, which talks about the same consumer insights for most markets. So our challenge is to bring that together and to create basically a global business out of that. But why? Why do we want to be global? What we have is, I think we have good marketeers, execution, reasonable funding, because we are a 12 billion company, so we can do things. But what we need, and what I think is the most seldom spark, it's a truly, really good idea, okay? And when you see at the presentation this mornings, sometimes you see a really, truly new and good idea, and you sit there, I wish I had that, okay? Considering we had a day's presentation, maybe that happened once, there are very few around, considering that most of the people here probably know all the great and good ideas which are out there. So we basically see this from an internal perspective, that we need to scale the few good ideas we have, both when it comes to the brand positioning, when it comes to suppliers, speed of rollout, and efficient use of marketing and innovation resource, which you all knew is not cheap. And on top of that, coming back to the discussion we had this morning, we do not want to underpay our agency by being fragmented, because that is one of the key issues when you have 19 brands in some of the categories. External perspective. Well, we talked about the marketing CEO. My view is slightly different. I think a CEO has a very important job of keeping investors happy as much as driving internally the company. But investors today more and more actually value a single global brand rather than a portfolio of many small ones. And for most chief executives, and we are a conglomerate because we are also a forest player, this becomes a real more and more interesting discussion why SCA or any other company wants to get global. Then on a customer perspective, globality matters as well. For example, if you're in China and you show up and say you're the #1 world player in incontinence care, you get definitely more attention than if you come in and say, well, I'm the market leader in Malaysia. So clearly, there is value to be global, also from an external perspective. Good. I think I will not repeat what Petra said, because it basically reflects what SCA is doing as well. I would like to talk a little bit more about the human relationship that you have when you go global. And my first point is really about nice operators. So you have a colleague sitting in Malaysia, and he's quite nice, and he says to you, but you know, I like your global idea, but you know, I know my consumer better than you, and I understand my brand better than everybody else, and by the way, I can execute much faster than a category. And if you come with a global idea, let me think about that. Okay? So that's a nice one. The more vocal local operators comment are generally more the global innovation center lives in an ivory tower. I mean, I phrased it in correct English here. It takes years to get anything done, and you have no idea about the competitive pressure here. And this is clearly something which you probably all have heard, either by being of a global agency network or media network and things like that, and the complaints of our colleagues in the local markets about what they thought about their global category, okay? And then, for the fun of being true, I mean, clearly that is probably what most of them are thinking, okay? So what we want to do now is to discuss how we address this and what does it mean to be a global marketer today. Thank you.
I think what you'll find as we go through these challenges that global marketers face, probably quite a lot of them are actually exactly as you find in your media agencies. In the creative agencies, we know the dynamics are very much the same. But indeed, if things are globalizing and now there is a team somewhere in an ivory tower and somewhere in a real market where the real action happens, and you've got to work together because no longer do the economics work that we can basically sort of ignore each other, you know, what does the leader, what does the marketer of the future look like in your eyes? Petra, why don't you start?
And I think this morning the marketing of the future was described very well by David Weldon. And I think the T-shaped person, that's something which I recognize very much, which is someone who, as a global marketeer, you truly need to add value. If you're going to do exactly the same or what someone locally can do, I mean, it's useless. So you really need to come with something and be an expert on a certain area where you truly can add value. And at the same time, you need to be so all-rounded that you can work together with the local teams and with the partners inside your own company, but also outside your company, to really make it come to life and to have it embedded in their way of thinking, but also inspire them that there is something in it for them. So it's the T-shaped model, real expert, but be all-rounded enough to be able to inspire the others that they take it on board and start running with it. Okay,
and Christoph?
Well, I make it very short. I think the global marketeer needs to be able to herd cats, be incredibly positive every day, and be very, very much able to be perseverant. While the local marketeer has also a very big function, which is to be very common sense oriented and not taking everything which comes for global as a truth of everything, but must understand that's about a dialogue between local and global, where global lead the consensus and the purpose of the brand, and local basically activates it and makes it a wonderful event for consumers on the ground.
It's funny, we've coined the term servant leaders for the global leaders, and I think David talked a little bit about that as well, though he used different words, where on the one hand, if the countries don't feel that you're out there to make them succeed, right? So that means listening, going out there and just asking the right questions, and that there is no global market, there's just a collection of markets, then you don't have license to operate. But at some point, there is this sort of, somebody needs to lead, right? And then actually when you say it's not there, it's here, and you're on board or you're not, servant leadership, the two really do come together. Eh? But I think also you raise a very important point that you need to have a looking for similarities mindset in countries. And it can't be the marketers or the media people that say we need that. That comes from the very top, doesn't it? Because you just can't afford to work like this anymore. So, obviously, there's a lot of media people in the room, and let's say this servant leader or T-shaped global marketer is operating. What does that mean for the relationship with all the other parties? We looked at shifting responsibilities. How do we work in the future with our partners? And what can these people take away from this session?
Yeah, now that's going to change, definitely. And I think it's going to be a mixed bag. So on the one hand, some elements of the media usage are definitely going to be global, and we will work within setting out the vision, setting out the strategy on the big building blocks of the communication. Whereas there definitely also will be room for local interpretation, local adaptation within the framework in order to make it really relevant for local consumers, because the last thing you want is to have a common denominator which is just okay-ish for everyone because it's now the same across Europe. But you want to have the spice and the spikes to be relevant at the local. So it's finding this balance on what you're going to really set global and what is it and the freedom you give at the local level to really make it hit in the market.
Christoph, what do you see there?
Well, I think that the globe has to bring some disciplines of which partners and in which frameworks we operate from them. But then at the end, I still believe that the great idea get executed in the market. And in some markets, like, I mean, in the European Union, some markets are much closer to each other, so it's much easier to roll advertising out and use similar media channels. But I also see that in the D&E world, things are still quite different. And the similarities are sometimes hard to find, both in media, but also in languages and habits and religion and cultural backgrounds and things like that. So I think this morning we talked about the lead agency is dead. I probably believe in that, but I don't believe that the lead network is dead. or the lead. And network doesn't mean Omnicom or WPP or these type of networks, but it means that you have to create a network globally of different agencies who basically, within a framework, help to build you these brands and also brings the right level of discipline and efficiency to the party.
It's interesting because some of our clients actually look to their agency partners to be the ones to actually help them globalize. So and what's more interesting there is that very often it turns out that the agency has even stronger geographical silos with disincentives to cooperate over regions than the company that's actually asking for the advice. We've been brought in many times by agencies that said, look, can you come and help us here? Because actually we've got exactly the same problem. Now, let's make it more personal, because you guys, both of you, on a brand and now general management level, you've gone through the ranks of marketing, and now you're playing the role of what we would call the global brand CEO. You're taking the global perspective, you're taking the long-term perspective, and at the same time you're dealing with very smart marketeers that do know better when you talk about local reality, but at the same time you're trying to develop a strategy that creates global growth. What are some of the sort of real personal, if you like, lessons learned that maybe you could share? Something that went really well and something you'd probably never want to do again.
Now, yeah, I've done this in my former jobs and here as well, and I've learned my way. And I think one of the big mistakes I've made in the past is that I thought that once you had clarity about roles and responsibilities, that hierarchy would do the job. So just because I was the end responsible, I would say, okay, and now you're going to do it. Now I can tell you that's a failure, of a recipe for failure, because if a country really is forced to do it because of power, it's going to fail. And I think so that's what I'll never ever do again, and change that into making sure that throughout the process of either the plans you are developing, you take the countries on board, and you truly listen, and you're able to create something what makes them proud as well, and what they can sell within their company towards the salespeople and everyone involved there. So I think it's finding that balance of really having something which is inspiring for the local countries that makes it work. Otherwise, it's that.
So it's about quality, because everybody can smell quality a mile away. And it's about low ego, if I hear you.
Very low ego. And they will score with it. You as a central team, yeah, you will score within the organization. But you're never going to see the outside world. So it's not about your ego, the ego of the team. It's about them being able to score the goal and to be in the spotlight, not you. I think that is an important one. Yeah.
Christoph.
Yeah, very similar. I think I would bring it to a very simple point. I mean, global marketing in the past has been quite arrogant from time to time. And I think we always have to assume when you're in global marketing that the local operator knows much more than you do, at least when it comes to their market. And the second thing, which you mentioned as well, is really the fact that you have to sell global ideas with the perspective of the local marketeer, what's in for them. I think that to sell it for the greater good of your company doesn't work when you sit with local marketeers in any market, but you have to show them how that actually enhances their business, their careers, and basically the benefit from their perspective to cooperate and to add to the global part while also accepting then the lead of the global part.
Yeah, it reminds me, and I think it's very similar, now when we do global marketing training courses, it's actually a lot about sort of a consultancy skill, where the right answer isn't that you have the answer, it's that you're asking the right questions. And that sort of feels completely wrong, because you've flown all across the world to go help them, and then it would be pathetic that you're asking questions rather than giving the answers. But now, guys, we wanted to, just as C² is doing, bring more of the marketer and what's going on behind the scenes perspective onto the stage. Hopefully some of this has been interesting, and perhaps we'll see you again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.